Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with a midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it, as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. And there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up and will be a lot bigger in the future than they are now, and take advantage whenever you feel ready if you wish to do so. Today we're going to start with one of the many benefits of ending cannabis prohibition, and if you're a state that took initiative early, no doubt you're very happy and celebrating what you're seeing, as states have generated over $15 billion in cannabis tax revenue since 2014. And what state and lawmakers in the right mind wouldn't want this unless they're paid to think otherwise? Though earnings did decline last year, a report finds. And so this report comes from Marijuana Policy Project. But while legal sales saw about $3.8 billion in cannabis tax dollars in 2022 alone, it represents the first time that revenue was lower than the prior year, which experts attribute to a multitude of factors, including such. But they conveniently leave out how long it took for New Jersey and New York to come online, and especially the fact that there's so few legal dispensaries, especially in New York, only four. I believe in one of their first months, they only brought in $1.18 million in tax dollars. And so that's one of the big reasons that tax dollars actually went down, as opposed to going up, because of, unfortunately, socialist top-down policies that have not been very effective. But as we carry on still, the fact that 2022 brought in almost $100 million less in tax revenue compared to 2021 is notable, given that more states like New Jersey and New Mexico launched their rec markets last year, which would presumably lend to higher tax yields. But of course, they want to leave New York out of this because it's such a mess. No one really wants to talk about what's going on there. But states where cannabis legalization is newer did see higher levels of tax revenue, except for New York. But 6 states with the most established markets have seen declines offsetting those gains. So it's good to see that it's the more mature markets losing some of those as opposed to the new markets coming on, because new markets always have room for improvement. So here are the 2022 state-by-state totals, Alaska leading the way, so you can pause to just go through that list if you're interested. And then here are the national year-by-year totals. And then you can pause to read. And now there's more in the article if you want to grab the link, but just going to cover this for now. As we move along, this one from Canna.io. Thank you, Canna, for sharing this. As Florida Cannabis Adult Use Ballot Initiative reaches 94% of valid signatures and ahead of 2024 when they want to put this on the ballot. So we love to see that Florida seems to already be at 841,130 signatures. And of course, the source for this is dos.elections.myflorida, and that link will be in the description if you wanted to check this out. But love to see that for Florida, a market with 21 million people and over 100 million in tourism annually. That adult use market is going to be massive. And as we land in May already, if you can believe it, Curaleaf finally reports their fourth quarter and fiscal year end 2022 results. Just in the nick of time, as Green Thumb will actually be reporting their Q1 aftermarket close today, which I'll feature on Sunday. But just a disclaimer, I do not own shares of Curaleaf. However, they are one of the tier 1 MSOs I've been following for a long time. And like many other MSOs, they did suffer a net loss of $260 million on the full year, mainly writing off goodwill and impairment charges because values have gone down, and for paying taxes. And so I would just say, given the circumstances, while messier than expected, Curaleaf and all the other MSOs still operate with both hands tied behind their backs in very difficult conditions. And when you consider how New York and New Jersey basically did everything in their power to not help these MSOs, I'd consider it a year of growing pains before, the floodgates might finally open as we see more states reforming their laws. And for what it's worth, while Curaleaf was claiming that they were going to do $125 million in free cash flow for 2022, they only managed to produce operating cash flow of $46 million, which is well short. But I do deep down believe that if New Jersey and New York wanted these industries to succeed and actually gave them a chance, as opposed to handcuffing them and trying to monopolize them so big alcohol and big tobacco could swoop in, I think it could be a completely different story. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. But rant over, so you can pause to read a little bit of the highlights. Pause to read if you want to read some of what Boris Jordan, executive chairman, commented on. Otherwise, full link will be in the description if you wanted to go through it. And just because I'm not a financial advisor, I don't feel as comfortable going through all the numbers. But thankfully, there are kind people like Cannavestments on Twitter that share their analysis. And so he's been an investor since 2014. Again, take these with a grain of salt, but this is a deeper dive on the recent Curaleaf earnings from Cannavestments. So an unexpectedly messy end to the year for Curaleaf Inc. with gap conversion, West Coast restructuring, and tougher macro conditions, all challenging results. Like others, 2023 will prove to be the show me story of whether Cura can inflect towards better profitability and real cash flow. Seems like West Coast restructuring is an expensive task to go through. As a shareholder of Cresco Labs, I'm very happy they did it sooner than later, but we'll have to see whether 2023 is obviously the year where they end up producing real results and positive free cash flow. So you can pause to read if you're interested. Otherwise, grab the link in the description if it's unclear in any way. Well, thank you Jungle Java for sharing this one, as Columbia Care, one of the smaller tier 2 MSOs that is set to merge with Cresco Labs, and they have until June 30th to get that to go through. But from my understanding, both parties do want this merger to happen. For what it's worth, this could be Columbia Care's last time reporting as Columbia Care in itself. They'll be reporting their first quarter 2023 results on May 15th, less than 2 weeks away before U.S. financial markets open in the morning. And so I'll be looking forward to seeing that and seeing if they've been able to cut costs. As we've been seeing in some of the Western markets, it seems like prices are also going up, and that could have a very beneficial impact on MSOs. Maybe not so much in Q1, but hopefully Q2, Q3 as we move along through the year. And so if you forgot, as I almost did this morning, Green Thumb is set to release their Q1 earnings already after market close today at 5 p.m. So we'll be looking out for that, and I'll feature that on my Sunday video. For the rest of them, I'll scroll through slowly so you can match up the company with the upcoming Q1 earnings date. And if they're not on this list, from my understanding, they've just yet to release their Q1 earnings date. I think that's mostly just Cresco Labs and Curaleaf for what it's worth. And so with that, we did at least get the Safe Banking Act of 2023 filed and put onto Congress.gov, which means everything that these senators have been saying seems to be in play. And while they keep saying that this is a new banking bill that's going to help the cannabis industry, any of us in the know, we know this is not new whatsoever. Hopefully the 8th time is the charm, because the longer you don't solve a problem, it just exacerbates the problem needing a solution, which is the Safe Banking Act of 2023. And so I will admit, I skimmed through it a little bit. I have not read the full thing, especially when Schmuck Schumer ran on cannabis reforms, and for the last 2.5 years, while he's been the Senate Majority Leader, he has sat on his ass and done nothing except help Big Pharma. Sadly, that's been the case, but good news. Fortunately, the banking sector has a lot of pull as well, and they're getting more and more vocal by the week, which we love to see. As I've shared in past videos as well, American Bankers Association supports overhaul of cannabis laws. The banking sector comes out in support of proposal that would align state and federal laws on cannabis-related businesses. No doubt they want the liquidity and the $30 billion in cash that's stuck on the streets. But is the question going to be, can we pass SAFE alone as it is, or is Schumer going to try and add stuff to it that's going to make it unpassable and ruin the fun for all of us again? We don't know. Full link in the description if you wanted to read through it, but just wanted to provide some resources. This is on the same sort of topic from Kiplinger. Safe Banking Act gets new life this week in cannabis investing. Conveniently stealing my title, but a bipartisan effort has given the Banking Act, which helps improve cannabis companies' access to finance, a shot to reach the Senate floor. And so full link if you wanted to read through it, but just providing resources to, try and paint as accurate of a picture as possible. But on top of all this momentum that continuously builds from Marijuana Moment, senators celebrate bipartisan cannabis banking bill reintroduction. And we haven't seen this many senators tweeting in sync with each other, which leads us to believe that, again, you hate to say it, but maybe this time it's going to be different. And so just wanted to share, as I did add this into my comments, I think from my Sunday video, but we have many senators tweeting in support. We got Schmuck Schumer, Jeff Merkley, John Hickenlooper, Jackie Rosen, Michael Bennett, Alex Padilla, Cortez Masto, Rand Paul, Ed Markey, that's 11, Patty Murray, Tina Smith, Bob Menendez, 13, Peter Welch, 14. And so obviously we'd rather see that coordinated effort than not. Does it mean anything this time around? We'd like to think so. Well, we got this timely editorial out of ChicagoBusiness.com telling it like it is, as Illinois' cannabis industry has a lot riding on this. And what do you think this is? No doubt, especially when Illinois, much like states on the East Coast, focus so much on social equity and giving opportunity to social equity entrepreneurs. From my understanding, Illinois approved an extra 185 licenses that were supposed to open pending, the entrepreneurs getting all the things that they need to get done from January to April of 2023. And from my understanding, there's been no news of this whatsoever. Want to take a guess as to why? Because they don't have access to banking, therefore they can't open up. And so no doubt, yes, there's a lot riding on SAFE. Sadly, this is behind a paywall, but just wanted to provide context as to why this story can be important. Of course, because so much is riding on getting access to banking. Well, with that, thank you, Sabatino, for sharing this one. Interview clip, a bit of an update on the progress being made behind the scenes. Firstly, to see TerraSend uplist onto the Toronto Stock Exchange in hopes to get more institutional capital and interest from investors, and then more MSOs hopefully following after them. And so about the TSX TSE listing of American cannabis companies, we have dialogue with multiple issuers. Just going to play the clip. Oops.
Really tried to focus on helping the companies structure their affairs in a way that allow them to continue to be listed in the Canadian market and take advantage of opportunities in the U.S. You saw that with a transaction that Canopy did last year in terms of structuring their affairs so they could get invested more in the U.S., but stay onside the Canadian listing rules, which really require them to be a legal business. And we see other companies that are taking advantage of that. So we have dialogue active with multiple issuers that are looking to replicate that structure so they can do expansion in the U.S. as well.
Okay, so we're basically out of time, but at least with the cannabis sector, you're leaning into that.
Absolutely, because we're there to support the clients.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
It's the American way, baby. Gotta love it. And so for what it's worth, just wanted to share, as apparently Boris did mention in the ER that they're in talks with the TXS. And I didn't listen to the whole interview. I'll try and find a link and then put it in the description because now I'm more curious. But thank you, Pauly B, for sharing. The whole interview was actually great. Didn't realize the work that they do to help companies list. I didn't realize either, but just glad to see more American ideals being exercised here and eventually giving the MSOs the freedom to uplist as they should have gotten a long time ago. And so with that, out of some states, thank you, Todd Harrison, for sharing this one. As Colorado lawmakers approve bills to allow online cannabis sales and bolster professional protection, sending them to the governor. So there's more details on the bill if you wanted to grab the link and go through this. But why I think this could be huge for Colorado, 2 reasons. Colorado is the most mature market in the country, and as they're seeing some sales fall, likely due to black market cannabis at lower prices, having an online e-commerce option is a way to potentially boost sales again in Colorado. And while secondly, in Canada, e-commerce works perfectly fine. It's not like anyone under 18 can even get into a cannabis shop because you have someone sitting by the door and IDing them. Hard to fake that sort of thing, which is hence why we do see youth use actually going down where cannabis is legalized. But at the same time, you can put the order online, go pick it up, or you can put the order online and have delivery come. There's so many options and it works great. So if Colorado can implement this, that would be massive, and we'll update you once the governor finally signs these bills into law. Well, with that, thank you, Hirsch Jane, for sharing this, as on Wednesday, supporters will start collecting signatures to get the proposal on the ballot in Ohio for, I believe, a upcoming election in 2023. The coalition needs 124,000 signatures from voters in 44 of Ohio's 88 counties before the July 5th deadline, less than 2 weeks from now. Good luck. Ohio borders 4 prohibition states: Indiana, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And so for what it's worth, this article from OhioCapitalJournal.com will be put in the link in the description, as Ohioans could vote to legalize rec cannabis later this year, but there are still hoops to jump through to get such a proposal on the November ballot. So lots of work to go, but a bit more here if you wanted to pause to read on why this could be a big opportunity, especially for states around it that don't have access to adult use. And so with that, happy to share from MJ Biz Daily, New Mexico's adult use cannabis sales have been bolstered by tourism and Texas residents. No doubt these two things have helped drive a ton of sales, and New Mexico is very happy to be sitting back and collecting the tax revenue, as the state brought in a record $32 million in rec sales during March alone, and is well on its way to reaching $400 million for 2023, as projected by the 2023 MJ Biz Fact Book, up from the original $300 million they saw in the initial 12 months. And so, of course, you can pause to read for a bit more information. There's a lot in this article that's very interesting, but just wanted to share it to relay the benefits of ending cannabis prohibition, especially if you're in an area where all the other states around you are prohibited. And so the changing medical market, you can pause to see some differences down here. Average cannabis sale per transaction in New Mexico, where recreational cannabis sales are actually happening. But of course, for more, grab the link down here if you wanted to go through it deeper. And with that, thank you, Cannasewers.io, for sharing this New Mexico cannabis sales from April 2022 to April 2023. So a nice visual figured I would share for what it's worth. There's a link here I'll put in the description, but just if you wanted to go through it, total medical sales in the red on the left, and then total adult use sales on the orange in the right. Well, it wouldn't be an episode if we didn't get to laugh at New York at some point, right? And so while sadly we're seeing more of the same, my next story hopefully has a bit of a silver lining on how this could change. But for what it's worth, thank you, Brad Racino, for sharing his monthly unsolicited thread of how things are going in New York cannabis as of May 1st, 2023. I look forward to these monthly and we'll relay them. But for what it's worth, 1, there should have been at least 100 CAURD or social equity entrepreneur stores open across New York State. According to Gov Hochul in an October interview, there are now 9, with 6 of them run by justice-involved licensees. 4 of them are within 1 mile of each other in New York City. 2, for months, CAURD licensees have complained that they can't get their retail site locations approved by the state and open for businesses. Wonder if that would be easier had safe banking passed almost 2 years ago, right? 3, the $200 million social equity fund was supposed to have been fully funded for the past 8 months, yet DASNY's fund manager has raised $0, and DASNY will not disclose how much money of the $50 million in state funds has been spent to date on the CAURD program. Sounds very irresponsible, and these clowns should have been fired a long time ago. While 4, Assemblywoman Donna Leperto and Senator Hinchy have introduced legislation that would allow farmers to sell their products directly to consumers and give OCM authority to provide grants to these growers. However, the bills have sown division between CAURD retailers and growers, and it's unclear whether the bill will become law. More and more uncertainty. 5, cultivators are weighing whether to plant again for this year's harvest. With extremely limited places to sell and a vast majority of new CAURD licensees months away from opening their doors at best, it's a risky bet to plant again and have a harvest for nobody to actually sell to. There are now 3 active lawsuits against the OCM CCB, and 1 seeking to find the CAURD program unconstitutional, as it is, 1 keeping an injunction on the Finger Lakes 6, and another aiming to stop a dispensary from opening in Harlem across from the Apollo Theater. Number 7, the OCM has not published its social and economic equity plan, which was supposed to be completed by January 1, then was pushed back to sometime by the end of the first quarter, which has passed. 8, one of the biggest looming deadlines after June 1st, cultivators that wish to process and distribute cannabis must hold an adult use processor or distributor license, but those licenses won't be issued by them. Cannot make this shit up. Number 9, New York's medical cannabis companies are still fighting for the state's medical program and its patients. They don't see their much hoped for elimination of the excise tax in Hochul's recent budget announcement, which sadly means that layoffs are always on the horizon. And what do you know? These layoffs are not a consequence of greedy capitalism, but instead a direct consequence of incompetent politicians implementing terrible and backwards policy that should have gotten them fired and replaced long ago. That's how New York has gotten to where it is. And so last one, thank you, Brad Racino. Number 10, there is still no seed-to-sale tracking system in place, which can allow for diversion of products and a messy chain of custody. BioTrack was picked in December as the state's preferred software under a 5-year, $1.2 million contract, which likely came out of that $50 million fund. But what are they getting paid to do, as they've done nothing? So he asked, what did I miss? Thank you, Jeff Schultz, for this last one. No mention of the illicit market experiencing unprecedented success and unfettered expansion. Hard to knock them. They don't need to comply with the MRTA or pay taxes. They use credit cards and banks, which legal operators can't. And there appears to be no downside since the state does not want to, or perhaps does not know how to deal with it. So while that is awful, and that is New York, Reginald Babin, who used to work for Schmuck Schumer, did deliver us this past week. And so for what it's worth, Reggie Babin, the former chief counsel and lead cannabis policy advisor to Schmuck Schumer, explains in a new cannabis moment op-ed why he's optimistic about passing the Safe Banking Act this Congress. Now take what he says with a grain of salt, because clearly he's not helped anyone in this industry over the last 5 years, as some evolved man does conveniently point out, but he adds from this article, which I'll put the op-ed in the description, with the window still open and a viable compromise on the table, the critical question is not whether this time will be different, but what can be done to ensure that it is. Again, promising, as he thanks Tom Engel for letting him share his thoughts and write an op-ed in Marijuana Moment. And for what it's worth, just sharing these other comments, Derek Townsend, sounds like the banks could use some deposits at the moment. It's good for everybody. Yes, Derek, you get it. And then Chris Connors, holding out for social equity, has almost completely bankrupted most minority-owned businesses. That is a fact. Everyone like us in the know understands this, but anyone that, on the surface level doesn't pay attention to anything and just listens to politicians, they really think that, no, social equity is the way we get social justice, when we know descheduling would be the way to provide real social justice. But I digress. Kyle Yeager, unfortunately, not all states getting the memo, as just in Wisconsin, Republicans vote to strip cannabis legalization from governor's budget request again, which is really sad to see, because time and time again, we hear Governor Tony Evers calling on his lawmakers to work for the will of the people of Wisconsin. But sadly, in this case, it's Republican lawmakers working against democracy and against the will of Wisconsinites, again blocking this, sadly, so that they do not get access to a safer, non-addictive recreational alternative. And for whatever reason, they're okay with Wisconsinites going to neighboring states and giving them their tax dollars. It makes no sense. Wonder who pays them to continue blocking that. And so with that, thank you, Tom Engel, for sharing, as the U.S. Secret Service is relaxing rules on past cannabis use by prospective agents, probably because they can't find enough quality people to hire, and for whatever reason, a lot of quality people also happen to be friendly to cannabis. What a coincidence. But obviously a good step in the right direction, and while we would hope that this could help normalize the plant, it won't do as much as sharing facts in the mainstream, which is less common because the mainstream is bought and paid for by Big Pharma. But more on the story if you wanted to read through it. Well, we got some interesting quotes from former President Trump. While Marijuana Moment shares this, Trump admits cannabis is a pretty popular thing. At least he's looking at the data and seeing what Americans can agree upon, what's bipartisan and what's really popular, even as he argues it does damage. And I would just be so curious to see who's presenting him this data and what led him to this conclusion. He adds, I'm going to take a look at some final results, but indications are that it is not exactly helpful. Yeah, whatever, Trump. We know that you, like all other politicians, are notorious liars, and you are paid to believe what you believe. However, you have to think that it crossed his mind to embrace this issue as an easy way to get even more votes and popularity heading into 2024, especially in contrast to the damage that the Biden administration has already done by printing 40% of dollars in circulation, creating the inflation, getting us into World War III. The recent announcement that people with good credit scores have to actually pay for people who have bad, it makes no sense. And so you just have to think that if both parties got their head out of their asses and was like, look, this is a real thing that Americans want, whether it's descheduling or it's ending the federal overhang or getting the States Reform Act passed, if either party were to ran on cannabis legalization in 2024, no doubt the party that is more pro-cannabis would likely win. Now, again, this is wishful thinking. Obviously, you can imagine if this would be the case, it could create a massive green wave. But again, wishful thinking, take that with a grain of salt for now until things develop. But with that, thank you, Tom Engel, for some news out of Germany. Their health minister has circulated submitted a draft bill to enact the first part of the government's two-step cannabis legalization plan to cabinet officials for review. And so moving at the pace of snails, unfortunately, but we can see promise kept, comments welcome from Prof. Karl Lauterbach, who's the health minister of Germany. And then my favorite source, Alfredo Pascual, out of Germany, says, in a way, funny he asks for comments when the bill isn't publicly available yet. Yeah, that's not funny. That just shows his lack of self-awareness. And it would be great if you could make the bill available. And so more on this if you wanted to read through it. But with that, thank you, Alfredo Pascual, again, my favorite source out of Germany, for sharing some data, as Germany imported a total of almost 25,000 kilograms of medical cannabis flower or flower equivalent in 2022. Yet German pharmacies' only option for patients to buy their medical cannabis received in 2022 about 60% of that number, governmental data just published shows. So it seems like the government's holding on to cannabis and they haven't sold it all, or the demand is not as high. I'm not exactly sure, but just wanted to share what we have. So cannabis imported into Germany versus delivered to pharmacies. And so it seems like, again, the demand is a little bit smaller. Obviously, if they were to expand, access or other things, they can change it, but just showing this for what it's worth. And he adds a few more comments down here if you wanted to pause to read. Links will be in the description. But with that, before we head off, some studies. This one from the Journal of Clinical Neuropharmacology is medical cannabis in the treatment of Parkinson's disease from April 19th, 2023. And so you can pause to read the objectives and methods, but happy to relay that after starting medical cannabis results, 56% of opioid users, 56, more than 50%, more than the majority, were able to decrease or discontinue opioid use within an average daily morphine milligram equivalent change from 31 at baseline to 22 at the last follow-up visit. Now, after reading this, I do understand that I have actually featured this in a past video before, and so I do apologize for recycling a study, but it does say what it says, that with access to medicinal cannabis, less people needed opioids, and no doubt Big Pharma is afraid of that. While the medical cannabis was well tolerated with no severe adverse effects reported and low rate of MC discontinuation or medical cannabis discontinuation due to adverse effects. And so I might have shared this in a different journal or in a write-up based on the study, but anyways, for what it's worth, does highlight that medical cannabis reduces opioid use, and that can reduce eventual overdoses. While this one comes out in normal survey, patients frequently report using cannabis to combat sleep disorders. And so this comes from Sydney, Australia. Researchers affiliated with the University of Sydney surveyed 1,600 Australians regarding their use of medical cannabis. 64% of those surveyed acknowledged consuming cannabis to mitigate symptoms of a sleep disorder, typically insomnia. Most respondents said that cannabis greatly improved their sleep quality. I would attest to that because it improves mine. A majority of respondents also said that they decreased their consumption of benzodiazepines, what do you know, and alcohol, cause about 40% of crime following their use of cannabis, a finding that is consistent with other studies. Boom. That's a big finding. And while this is a survey of just 1,600 people responding to a survey, still data that should be acknowledged to at least deschedule cannabis so we can start looking at the medical benefits. And last one, from National Library of Medicine, or from PubMed, high potency cannabis use, mental health symptoms, and cannabis dependence, triangulating the evidence. And so another study looking at these claims from April 24th, 2023, more on the background and methods if you wanted to pause to read, but results, high potency cannabis preference was associated with a slight increased risk of cannabis dependence after adjusting for confounding, with the exception of cannabis use frequency. But get this, no association was found between THC concentration in cannabis and cannabis dependence. Another sort of shaky claim that cannabis makes people dependent, although no one's ever really been physically addicted to cannabis. They can be mentally addicted, but there's no physical withdrawal like you see with benzodiazepines. There was weak evidence of a small association between cannabis potency and depression and anxiety. Happy to report that that's weak evidence, and there was no association between high potency cannabis preference or THC concentration in cannabis and psychosis-like symptoms. Boom, take that prohibitionist, more reason to deschedule. With that one last chuckle before we head off, this is in response to the op-ed written by Schmuck's former staffer, highlighting reasons to be optimistic about cannabis banking passing this session. And I'm glad I read this again because this just popped in my head. Can you let me know in the comments if a congressional session is 1 year, meaning they have to pass this by the end of 2023, or is a congressional session 2 years, meaning they could have until 2024? I'm really hoping it's the former, not the latter, but please let me know in the comments. And with that, some humor to get you through the week. Thank you, hompz, another investor that's been in the trenches with us for a long time, with a very timely Dumb and Dumber reference. So you're telling me there's a chance? And so, of course, most of us thought it would be easy, smooth sailing because, of course, if states reform their laws and if politicians wanted to work in the best interests of these industries, we would have seen it unfold very differently and we would have been closer to this. But the reality is we've learned some valuable lessons despite all the benefits of ending cannabis prohibition. The reality is don't listen to what people say. look at their actions. Because all of these politicians have been virtue signaling for 2 years, saying they're for the little guys, but all their actions have proven that they are exactly for the opposite, not working for the will of the American people, but sadly for the oligarchs that buy them. And so sadly, we've gotten absolutely nothing out of Congress since the Dems have taken over until now, which is ironic because they ran on pro-cannabis issues, if you can believe that. The good news is that it is still a state-led growth story, and as we're seeing more and more states reform their laws month after month as the momentum continues to build, the reality is that banks have been very irresponsible with their lending, and some of them are starting to fail. Hence, probably why we're seeing the ABA make a bigger push, because what is the cannabis industry flush in that, all these banks necessarily need for liquidity? Cash, baby. 30 billion of it up until now, since they haven't solved the problem and it's been exacerbated thus far. And so, do you think we're getting the incremental reform at the end of summer? Let me know in the comments. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I'll catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody.